Nisha Bagchi and you're watching India Global. From possible US sanctions on Pakistan over its growing ties with Iran to China's declining influence in the Indo-Pacific after pro-China Solomon Islands PM failed to secure majority in the polls. We'll discuss how this impacts India and more in today's episode. But first, let's take a look at the headlines. US threatens Pakistan with sanctions over Iran ties. Warning comes days after Iran president visit. What do closer Iran-Pakistan ties mean for India? Pro-China Solomon Islands PM loses majority. Is China losing its grip on the Indo-Pacific? First poll since islands tilt towards Beijing. Is this China's loss and India's gain? Asia, world's most disaster-prone region in 2023. 79 water-related disasters in Asia last year. 9 million Asians hit by climate disasters. World Meteorological Organization calls for urgent action. Russia detains Deputy Defense Minister for corruption. Deputy Defense Minister allegedly took bribes. Most high-profile corruption case in Moscow since 2022. Days after Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi visited Karachi, the US has now threatened to impose sanctions on Islamabad for considering trade deals with Iran, emphasizing that the US will impose sanctions on suppliers to Pakistan's ballistic missile program. US state noted that Washington will continue to take actions against the spread of weapons of mass destruction. Possible US sanctions could significantly impact Pakistan, which is currently recovering from economic instability. We'll discuss this and more, but first my colleague Vishal brings us this report.
The US has warned Pakistan of potential sanctions. Vedant Patel, the deputy spokesperson of the State Department, has said that the US advises anyone considering business deals with Iran to be aware of the potential risk of sanctions. The US has also said that ultimately it is Pakistan that can speak about its foreign policy pursuits and ambitions. So what is the reason behind this warning? The warning comes in the wake of Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi's 3-day visit to Pakistan this week. It was the first visit by an Iranian president to Pakistan in 8 years. The visit came months after Iran had carried out attacks across the border in Pakistan. The latter had responded to the attacks within days by targeting a few sites in Iran. Coming back to the meet held this week, 8 bilateral agreements were inked, with Raisi vowing to boost trade with Pakistan to $10 billion per year. There's also an agreement of setting up a joint special economic zone with Islamabad. The Iran-Pakistan agreements also include judicial support in civil cases and cooperation in security matters. Soon after finishing his Pakistan tour, Iranian President Raisi has now arrived in Sri Lanka. According to reports, he is expected to inaugurate a hydropower and irrigation project that was delayed due to international sanctions on his government. With a powerful West Asia nation hovering the subcontinent, India will keep an eye out.
To discuss this and more, we have with us strategic affairs expert Brahma Chellaney. Welcome to our show, sir. Thank you for joining us. So firstly, I want to discuss what the significance of closer ties between Iran and Pakistan mean, especially for India and in its neighborhood.
Iran and Pakistan have been close partners in the past, but their relations of late have been quite strained. We saw that earlier this year when Iran carried out missile and drone strikes in Pakistan's Balochistan. It targeted what it said were Iranian terrorists. These are Baluch separatists that it targeted. And the Iranian president's current visit to Pakistan is essentially a fence mending trip. The fact is that those strains are coming in the way of closer cooperation between Pakistan and Iran.
Right. And now that the US has threatened to impose sanctions on Pakistan over its ties with Iran, how do you see these possible sanctions impacting Pakistan?
It's a good question. The US threat is just a threat. The reality is that the US is very much supporting the present government in Pakistan. The US kept quiet over the recent elections in Pakistan. which were neither fair nor open. In fact, they were essentially rigged. The military's preferred candidate, Shehbaz Sharif, has returned as the Prime Minister of crisis-torn Pakistan, but the government he heads lacks popular legitimacy, with its survival dependent on the general, especially the army chief. The real issue is this, that Pakistan is teetering on the brink of an economic collapse. It urgently needs another IMF bailout, and the US is very much supporting Pakistan's request for a fresh IMF bailout. So the threat of sanctions is really to goad Pakistan from developing closer ties with Iran, but it's nothing more than a threat.
Right. And how do you think that closer ties to Tehran could embolden Islamabad?
Well, I think Pakistan has close ties with China, with the US. If it manages to also have close ties with Iran, then of course it will provide greater foreign policy leeway to Pakistan. It'll be able to then maintain close ties with rival powers. But the fact is that unless these strains in Iran-Pakistan ties are actually addressed by Pakistan and by Iran, there is little possibility of Iran and Pakistan generally cooperating on regional or extra-regional issues. At the moment, they are each trying to ensure that the bilateral relationship, does not come under greater strain.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chellaney, for joining us today. Shifting our focus to climate change, which is devastating the world, Asia continued to bear the brunt of weather, climate and water-related hazards in 2023, making it the world's most disaster-hit region, according to a new report. Parameshwar Bawa takes us through the glaring observations from the World Meteorological Organization's latest report.
No other region on Earth experiences more climate, weather and water-related disasters than Asia, according to a new report. The World Met Organization released its 2023 State of the Climate in Asia report, which found that risks are only rising. Floods and storms caused the highest number of reported casualties and economic losses, while the impact of heat waves became more severe, according to this latest report. From heat waves to flooding and storms, climate change makes all kinds of disasters more intense all over the world. But the problem is particularly acute in Asia, which is heating up faster than the global average thanks to greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuels. There were 79 water-related disasters in Asia in 2023. The majority of them were actually flood and storm events, which collectively affected 9 million residents in the region and killed at least 2,000 people. In India, Pakistan and Nepal, extreme floods and storms killed at least 600 people between June and August of last year. The heat, however, is a bigger challenge than water-related hazards. Overall, Asia's annual mean near-surface temperature last year was the second highest on record. Many countries in the region set temperature records last year. No surprise, considering it was also the hottest year on the record for the entire planet. Searing heat waves spread across China, South Asia, and Southeast Asia, affecting at least a third of the global population last year. Heat waves that lingered from April to June killed at least 110 people in India alone, and this is keeping in mind that deaths from heat strokes are actually often undercounted. Japan experienced its hottest summer on record. China experienced 14 high-temperature events in the summer, with 6 stations actually breaking their temperature records there. Climate activists are arguing that developing countries in Asia bear the brunt of climate-related adversities without adequate means to combat foreseeable disasters and the worsening impacts of climate change as well. But with emissions of greenhouse gases not being cut fast enough, the world is almost certainly going to cross the threshold of 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial times. Beyond that limit, climate scientists project more intense, frequent, and unpredictable extreme weather events with devastating consequences on life.
Now shifting our focus to the Indo-Pacific, a crucial region for India and one that is under constant threat from China. Yet, it seems China could be losing its grip in the region as the pro-China leader of the Solomon Islands failed to secure a majority in the elections held this week. Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare is now in a race to form a coalition to lead the Pacific Island nation. Since returning to power in 2019, Sogavare shifted the island's foreign policy to tilt majorly towards China. The nation even cut long-standing diplomatic ties with Taiwan in favor of Beijing. The Solomon Islands lie at a strategic position in the Indo-Pacific, with the ability to influence trade routes and maritime security in the region. Within the US-China trade competition, the Indo-Pacific is a focal point. Thus, these poll results are expected to diminish China's influence on the Solomon Islands. Could this be India's gain? Could Quad and other countries use Solomon Islands as an opportunity to increase economic engagement in the region? Let's discuss this and more with our guest, Don McLain Gill, geopolitical analyst and an expert on the Indo-Pacific region. The fact that Sogavare lost these elections and wasn't able to secure a majority, does this highlight that China is losing its grip in the Indo-Pacific?
Right, thank you. And question, but we have to put this into context first, right? Since the shift in 2019 from China to Taiwan, in the absence of any proper comprehensive debate or consultation, the people of the Solomon Islands were highly skeptical of what was to come next. The people have been gravely concerned over the corruption and anti-democratic drive and characteristics the country is currently immersing itself in, especially with the backing of China. And the security arrangement and the security agreement in particular, which was done sort of away from the knowledge of the people, but through the leakage, resulted into further concerns from the people of the Solomon Islands, fearing, of course, PRC-style crackdowns, right? So while we look at it from a geopolitical angle, the people are more aware and concerned over the socio-economic impact which the country is currently heading towards, right? So issues in healthcare, education, agriculture, and unsustainable business activities. China's desire to monopolize the country's logging industry, for example. So despite the tight grip of China, the people's discontent is clearly pushing back. And this is, of course, a great opportunity for countries like India to step in.
Right. As you mentioned, that this is a key moment for India to take on this opportunity to increase its influence in the region. So how do you think India can re-establish its position in the Indo-Pacific, given the fact that, we've seen diminishing ties between India and Maldives in the past 6 months?
That's true. And if you look into the Pacific Island countries, for example, it was only in 2014 when we began to reinvigorate our position amongst these countries. But there is an opportunity nonetheless for India, who has been quite known for its people-centric investments, its ability to gain the goodwill of the people despite fluctuations in the political dynamics. Look at Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, and the Maldives, for example. And this is crucial as India is positioning itself to be the voice of the global south as it continues to emerge as a rising great power. So the establishment of the Forum for Indo-Pacific Islands Cooperation is in fact a good step, but it needs to be reinvigorated based on the current trends at a time when, of course, the US-China narrative continues to polarize the discourses. India can bolster its position as a force that offers more options rather than forcing countries to choose sides. And this is something that India must provide, for these particular countries that are often looking for alternative partners. Rather than engaging in a project-for-project competition, India can take from the best practice of Japan and Southeast Asia that has provided socio-economic development and is known for that despite China's power maximization there. So as an Indo-Pacific major power, India has enough credibility to represent itself as an independent force, right? And moreover, it could work with countries like Japan, Australia, France, and even the US. And this would, of course, be a signaling to countries that see India within such arrangements that they would not be considered rigid, right? So India's presence in that would be sustainable for the countries. And just very quickly, what can India do in terms of concrete activity? Well, we have to look into the challenges that the people of the Solomon Islands are facing. India can expand its pharmacy cooperation, for example, which the Pacific Island countries really need. Economic and environmental friendly technology for agriculture and energy is something that Solomon Island residents in the greater PIC are also looking into. And of course, to work more with countries like Fiji, which is considered to be the hub of the Pacific Island countries, given our people-to-people close relations. So this is a long game, but I believe that India has the capacity, of course, to take the lead forward.
Right. So shifting our focus to some of the strategic alliances in the region, such as Quad, do you think this could be the beginning of Quad and other countries having a larger role in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, it should be. I mean, with the way that Indo-Pacific geopolitics now is actually heading, there's more room for like-minded partners forming area-specific arrangements to address the interests and needs of third countries. Japan and India, for example, have been working in South Asia, in Africa, to provide third countries with economic and developmental assistance. And as we have seen, the issue that is currently being faced in the Pacific Islands is because of the negligence of countries like the US or Australia towards the China challenge. And now that it is here, I think that this should be enough motivation for such like-minded countries to explore more issues of social economic interest to the people. As I mentioned, project-to-project competition is fine, but it should not be the focus of countries such as the Quad. And to really focus on areas that are really that really are beneficial to the people. And that would be a long and sustainable investment and a positive one at that.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Don, for joining us. You gave us some very interesting insights as to how India can grow its influence in the Indo-Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, shifting our focus to the Israel-Hamas war, Gaza ceasefire negotiations have now reached a standstill in Doha, Qatar, with the absence of US and Israeli delegations. The Qatar ministry spokesperson told reporters at a media briefing that Qatar was reassessing its role as a mediator between Israel and Hamas. The ministry spokesperson said that he condemned the negative remarks made by some Israeli officials as well as US officials on Doha's mediation efforts, and that the comments were one of the many reasons that Qatar was reassessing its role as a mediator. The spokesperson said that Qatar remains committed to mediating a ceasefire, although the odds are bleak. The spokesperson also said that there is currently no schedule for the next steps in ceasefire negotiations. Let's listen in to what he said.
Mediation is the only way to end this conflict, the only way to guarantee the security of the peoples on both sides, and the only way to end the massacre and the bloodshed that is taking place right now in Gaza. And without belief in the process itself, I feel that it will be very difficult for the mediators to accomplish a result. A reassessment of its role as a mediator. This has to do with a lot of elements, including the campaigns against my country in various media outlets and by various officials that are attacking our country in its role as mediator. We have deep frustration with such statements, especially when they come out of officials who are part of the establishment and understand exactly what the Qatari role and what the Qatari coordination with the international community has been over the mediation and over its humanitarian role. And that is one of the reasons why we are now reassessing our role as mediators.
Now, looking at some heartwarming news, an Indian heart is now beating in a young lady from Pakistan, thanks to a life-changing heart transplant from Chennai. What's even more touching is that the heart surgeons who did this surgery did it for free, and a trust fund by the doctors made it free for the poor family from Karachi. NDTV's Sam Daniel spoke to the patient and surgeons at the MGM Healthcare.
How does it feel now after the transplant?
Good, very good.
And what's your dream now once you get back to Pakistan?
Study.
What do you want to become?
Fashion designer.
Fashion designing?
Yes.
Very good, okay. And for you it was very difficult. You are a single mother, and tell us what you had to go through when your child was diagnosed with heart issue in Pakistan. It was very difficult?
यस मुश्किल तो बहुत था लेकिन फिर हम लोग यहाँ पर आए और इतना ज़्यादा अमाउंट मैं नहीं कर पा रही थी. हमने वहाँ पे कैंपेन भी चलाई थी मगर इतना अमाउंट नहीं हो रहा था.
You're relieved now, you're happy now.
यस सर, टू मच हैप्पी.
We also have Dr. Balakrishnan and Dr. Suresh Rao. Thank you very much. Tell us about the challenges in this case, Doctor.
Okay, this child came to us first in 2019. She was 14 years old. And she was very sick and with severe heart dysfunction. And if I remember right, her heart stopped. So we had to do CPR and then put her on a temporary pump called ECMO, and then another temporary pump. And then eventually we fitted an artificial heart pump called Medtronic HY, which is quite expensive. In spite of that, she became sick. The right side of the heart became sick, and the pump got infected in Pakistan, and she was very sick. She had a very severe leak of one valve called aortic valve. So the options to treat her were not simple. And eventually we run a trust along with Mrs. Chitra, which Northern called Ashwarya Trust. So through that trust and my own personal finances, and then a few patients helped, we funded the entire operation for totally free for them. We got a donor heart. I think it came from Delhi. And that heart was too big for her, so actually the chest had to be kept open for almost 10 days. And then she made a slow but good recovery, and now she's ready to go back. So
How much this would have cost, and
not less than 30-35 lakhs, perhaps even more.
what was that that made it so close to your heart that doctors like you put your personal finances and made sure the whole thing was free for the family?
It is because, see, she's a young girl. She could be my daughter. And once you treated them for so long, every life matters.
And doctor, when it comes to organ transplant and organ donations, Tamil Nadu, particularly Chennai, is being seen as the capital in the whole country. In this case, it's an international patient you're dealing with. What will this mean?
In other states, there are donations, but most of the times the organs are not used. Because in this case, there was an organ in Delhi, and none of the hospitals wanted that organ. Now, getting that organ also requires some kind of logistics. In fact, you have to get it from a chartered flight, which again will cost money. So many of the patients will refuse that. Luckily, she got a heart. There was no request, so it was allotted to her. Otherwise, international patients, it's very difficult to get the organ.
Thank you very much, doctors, for your time, and wish you all the best, Aisha and Sano.
Now shifting our focus to China. The China Manned Space Agency's Shenzhou 18 space mission is set to lift off tomorrow. As part of this ambitious space program, which aims to put people on the moon by 2030, the Shenzhou 18 spacecraft will be launched from the Yuan Satellite Launch Center on the edge of the Gobi Desert in the country's northwest. The spaceship will be housed by 3-member crew that will relieve the Shenzhou 17 crew that have been on the manned Chinese space station. The crew on board will spend about 6 months on the space station conducting scientific tests, installing space debris protection equipment, and more. The deputy director of the China Manned Space Agency said in a press conference today that China is working on opening access to its space station for foreign astronauts and space tourists. Russian security services ordered one of Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu's deputies be kept in custody on suspicion of accepting bribes. Deputy Defense Minister Timur Ivanov was detained on Tuesday in the most high-profile corruption case in Moscow since 2022. The Russian court ordered that the Deputy Defense Minister be kept in custody for 2 months while the investigation is pending. If convicted, Ivanov could face 15 years in jail. In other news in UK, 4 people have been injured after several household cavalry horses bolted and ran loose through central London. At least 1 soldier was hurt after a spooked horse smashed into cars. Pictures also show an injured man lying on the ground on Fleet Street. 5 horses, including 1 covered in blood, was also seen charging through other areas of London, including Tower Bridge and Strand. The animals bolted and threw their riders during their daily morning exercise. However, all the horses have now been recovered. Thank you for joining us on this episode of India Global. We'll see you tomorrow with a whole lot more.